My father left me as a child and returned to me when I became rich with my new wife and daughter. I was 8 years old when my father walked out of our lives. It wasn't a dramatic exit, no slamming doors or tearful goodbyes. He simply packed a bag one evening, told my mother he'd be back, and never returned. At first, we thought he'd gotten caught up at work, maybe an emergency business trip or something important enough to leave without a proper explanation. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, it became clear. He wasn't coming back. I didn't understand it then. All I knew was that my mother stopped smiling as much. The house felt emptier. Money became tight. She took on extra shifts at the diner, coming home late with tired eyes and the scent of coffee and grease clinging to her clothes. I would wait up for her sometimes, pretending to do homework at the kitchen table. She never told me to go to bed. Maybe she needed the company just as much as I did. For a while, I believed he would come back. That there had been some mistake, that he had a good reason for leaving us. I would sit by the window, watching cars pass, expecting one of them to slow down and park in front of our house. But he never did. And as time went on, the waiting turned to resentment. For years, I buried that pain under ambition. I told myself I would never be like him. That I would build something for myself so strong, so successful, that no one could ever walk away from me and make me feel small again. So I worked. Harder than anyone around me. I saved every penny. Studied late into the night. Took jobs that paid little but taught me everything I needed to know about business. By the time I was 22, I had started my first company. By 25, it had failed. But I picked up the pieces and started again. By the time I was 30, I had everything I'd worked for. A company worth millions, a reputation built from the ground up, and a life that no longer felt fragile. It took years of late nights, failures, and sacrifices, but I'd made it. And for a while, I thought that was enough. Then, one day, he returned. Not alone. No, my father came back with a new wife, 2 young children, and the same easy smile he used to wear when tucking me into bed all those years ago. Like time had erased the damage. Like his absence had been nothing more than a brief detour. But I hadn't forgotten. I opened the door that day out of curiosity more than anything else. When I saw him standing there, older but still recognizable, something sharp twisted inside me. "Son," he said, as if he had any right to call me that. "It's been a long time." I stared at him, silent. Behind him, his new family waited. The woman, young, probably no older than my early 30s, held the hand of a little boy. A girl, maybe 5 or 6, peeked out from behind her. They were a perfect picture of the life he had built without me. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I let him speak. He started with small talk. How he had been thinking about me lately. How he regretted the past, how he wished things had been different. How he was proud of what I had achieved. I didn't say anything at first. Just let him talk himself into a comfortable lie. Then, finally, I asked the one question that had burned in me since I was 8 years old. "Why did you leave?" His smile faltered. Just for a second. And that's when I knew. He hadn't come here to make amends. He had come because he had nowhere else to go. I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. "You had 20 years to come back. Why now?" He let out a sigh, as if he were the one carrying the burden. "I know I hurt you, son. I made mistakes." Mistakes. That was a nice way of saying he abandoned us. "I never meant to leave for good," he continued. "At first, I thought I'd just get some space, figure things out. But then, life happened. Life happened." I stared at him, at the man who had been a ghost for most of my existence. The man who had left my mother to struggle, who had left me to grow up wondering why I wasn't enough to make him stay. And now, standing in front of me, he expected what? Forgiveness? "Can we come in?" his wife asked softly. I looked at her then, at the woman who had taken the place my mother should have had. Did she know? Did she understand who this man was, what he had done? "Why are you here?" I asked. My father hesitated, and I knew the answer before he even spoke. We've hit some hard times," he admitted. "I lost my job. The economy's been rough. We just need a little help getting back on our feet." I laughed. I couldn't help it. So let me get this straight, I said, shaking my head. You disappeared for 20 years. Left us with nothing. And now that you have nothing, you're back. It's not like that, he tried. No, I cut him off. That's exactly what it's like. His face fell, and for the first time, I saw something real in his expression. Fear. You don't understand, he started, but I held up a hand. I understand perfectly, I said. You didn't care when I was a kid, struggling to understand why my father didn't want me. You didn't care when Mom worked herself to exhaustion to keep us afloat. You didn't care when I had to figure out everything on my own. But now that you need something. Now you care. His wife shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at the children. The little girl clutched her mother's dress, eyes wide. I'm sorry, he said again. I just thought, maybe we could be a family again. I met his gaze, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the years of silence. The birthdays without him. The nights I lay awake wondering if he even thought about me. No, I said simply. He blinked. What? You don't get to come back when it's convenient for you, I said. You don't get to waltz in here and ask for help like you're entitled to it. I owe you nothing. His jaw clenched. I'm still your father. No, I said, voice calm but firm. You were my father. A long time ago. His wife placed a hand on his arm. Maybe we should go. He looked at me one last time, as if searching for some crack in my resolve. But there was nothing left for him here. I stepped back and shut the door. As I stood there, listening to their footsteps retreat, a strange sense of relief washed over me. For years, I had imagined this moment. Wondered what I would say, how it would feel. And now I knew. I wasn't that abandoned little boy anymore. I had built a life without him. And I didn't need him now. For the next few days, I kept expecting to hear from him again. A call. A message. Something. But there was nothing. Maybe I had been wrong to assume he would keep trying. Maybe I had misjudged his desperation. Or maybe, just maybe, he had expected me to fold the moment I saw him. And I won't lie, part of me had almost wanted to. Not because I forgave him. Not because I needed him. But because I wanted an answer to a question I had buried deep inside me for years. Had he ever thought about me? Had he ever wondered what became of the boy he left behind? But the truth was clear. If he had, he wouldn't have waited until he needed something to return. And yet, despite everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I was right. A week later, I came home to find him sitting on the steps outside my house. Alone this time. I sighed, already exhausted before he even opened his mouth. What do you want? He looked up at me, his face drawn and tired. He had shaved since the last time I saw him, but it did little to hide the years etched into his skin. I just want to talk, he said. No asking for help. No favors. Just, a conversation. I studied him for a moment, searching for a lie. Then, against my better judgment, I sat down beside him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the quiet street. It reminded me of when I was a kid, sitting on this very step, watching the sky darken while I waited for him to come home. Nice place, he finally said, nodding toward my house. I didn't respond. I meant what I said before, he continued. I'm proud of you. I let out a short laugh. Funny. You weren't around to see any of it. He flinched. I deserve that. Yeah, I said, leaning back on my hands. You do. Silence stretched between us again. After a while, he sighed. Look. I'm not here to make excuses. I know what I did. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I turned to him. Then why are you here? His shoulders sagged. Because I wanted to see you. I didn't believe him. Not completely. But I let him talk anyway. I didn't leave because I didn't love you, he said quietly. I left because I was a coward. I swallowed, my jaw tightening. When things got hard, I ran. I thought I'd figure things out and come back. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it got to return. I turned my gaze toward the street, refusing to look at him. I would tell myself I'd call. That I'd write. But every time, I convinced myself it was too late. That you and your mother were better off without me. Don't put this on us, I said, my voice sharp. You don't get to act like you were doing us a favor. He shook his head. I know. I'm just telling you the truth. The truth. Something I had spent years craving, only to find it left a bitter taste in my mouth. I ran a hand over my face. You really expect me to believe you stayed away because you felt guilty? He hesitated. And that was when I saw it, the flicker of something else. Shame. Regret. And underneath it all, fear. That's when I realized something. He hadn't just left because he was a coward. He had left because he was running from something. And now, for some reason, that something had caught up to him. I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees. Tell me the real reason you left. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. I told you. No, I cut in. Not the version you tell yourself to make it easier to sleep at night. The truth. He hesitated, his hands clenching into fists. Then, finally, he exhaled. There was someone else. I stiffened. I didn't just leave you and your mom, he admitted. I left to be with another woman. I had imagined 1,000 reasons over the years. Work stress. A breakdown. Something tragic or complicated. But this? This was so simple. So selfish. I clenched my jaw. So let me get this straight. You didn't just abandon us. You replaced us. His hands tightened in his lap. I thought I was in love. I let out a bitter laugh. And what happened? She left you too. His silence was answer enough. I shook my head, disgusted. You know what's funny? I spent years wondering if I did something wrong. If I wasn't good enough. If I pushed you away. He turned to me, his eyes pained. It was never about you. But it should have been, I snapped. I was your son. I know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I will regret what I did for the rest of my life. For the first time, I saw real sorrow in his face. But it didn't change anything. I stood up. This was a mistake, I said. He looked up at me, desperation creeping into his features. Please. I shook my head. You don't get to come back after all these years and act like you care. You don't get to rewrite history just because you're out of options. He opened his mouth to argue, but I was done listening. I walked to the door, gripping the handle. Don't come back, I said. I mean it. He stared at me, something breaking behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he nodded. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. As I leaned against it, I exhaled. For the first time in my life, I felt lighter. Like I had finally let go of something I didn't even realize I had been carrying. But as I looked out the window, watching my father walk away for the second time in my life, I couldn't help but wonder. Why did it still feel like a loss? I told myself I was done with him. That night, I poured a drink, sat in my quiet house, and stared out the window, replaying the conversation over and over in my head. I should have felt satisfied. I finally had my answer. I had the closure I'd waited decades for. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. The next morning, I went to work as usual. My assistant, Daniel, greeted me with his usual efficiency. Your 10 o'clock meeting has been moved to 11, and you have a call from, he hesitated, clearing his throat. James Carter? My father. I clenched my jaw. Take a message, I said, brushing past him. I spent the day drowning myself in work, but it was no use. My focus kept drifting back to him. To the fact that even after shutting him down, he was still reaching out. By the time I got home, I had 6 missed calls. All from an unknown number. I poured myself another drink, staring at my phone. Then, against my better judgment, I picked it up and called back. It rang twice before he answered. Son. Don't call me that. A pause. Then, a tired sigh. I know you don't want to hear from me. But I need to explain something. I closed my eyes. You already did. Not everything. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Then talk. I didn't just leave because of another woman, he said. I left because I was in debt. I frowned. Debt? I owed people, he admitted. A lot of money. More than I could pay back. They were threatening me, your mother, even you. I thought if I left, if I disappeared, they'd move on. I sat up straighter, my grip tightening on the phone. You're lying, I said. If that were true, Mom would have told me. She never knew, he said. I kept it from her. I thought I was protecting you both. I was silent. I know it sounds like an excuse, he continued. Maybe it is. But that's the truth. I wasn't just running away from responsibility, I was running for my life. My pulse pounded in my ears. And what? They just let you go? No, he said. They found me. Eventually. That's why I had to keep running. That's why I never came back. I stared at the floor, my mind racing. Was he telling the truth? Or was this just another story to make me pity him? Either way, it didn't change what he had done. You still made a choice, I said. You left us with nothing. I know, he whispered. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Silence hung between us. I just needed you to know, he said. Even if you never forgive me. I should have hung up. I should have told him I didn't care. But instead, I found myself asking, and now? Are you still in trouble? A bitter laugh. Not anymore. But I have nothing left. No job. No savings. No home. Ah. And there it was. The real reason he was here. He wanted something. You're unbelievable, I muttered. You show up after 20 years, and you expect me to help you? No, he said quickly. I don't expect anything. I didn't know where else to go. I clenched my fist, breathing deeply. After everything, I should have told him to rot. But deep down, despite my anger, despite my resentment, a small, traitorous part of me still saw him as my father. And I hated that part of myself. You need money? I finally asked. Silence. Then, I won't lie. It would help. I let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. Please, he said. Not for me. For my kids. My wife, she doesn't deserve to suffer for my mistakes. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. I could hang up. I could tell him no and never look back. Or I could do something else. Something he wouldn't expect. I made my decision. Meet me tomorrow, I said. My office. 9 a.m. He hesitated. Take it or leave it. A pause. Then, softly, okay. I hung up. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just trying to get answers anymore. I was trying to win. I arrived at my office earlier than usual the next morning. The sky was still dark, the city quiet. I wasn't sure why I had come in so early, maybe to prepare myself, maybe to gather my thoughts before seeing him again. Or maybe, deep down, I was still that 8-year-old kid, waiting by the window for a father who never showed up. By 8:45, I was pacing. By 8:55, I had convinced myself he wasn't coming. By 9:03, the receptionist buzzed me. Mr. Carter is here to see you. I exhaled. Send him in. A minute later, he walked through my office doors. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked around, taking in the massive windows, the sleek furniture, the framed awards on the wall. You did well for yourself, he said. I didn't respond. He cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. Thanks for meeting me. Let's get this over with, I said, sitting down. You need money. How much? He blinked. How much? I repeated. He hesitated. 15,000. I laughed. 15,000? He shifted uncomfortably. It would help my family get back on our feet. Just something to cover rent and bills while I held up a hand, cutting him off. Let me get this straight. You left me and my mother with nothing. Disappeared for 20 years. And now you want me to bail you out? It's not like that. No? I leaned forward. Then explain it to me. He exhaled, rubbing his face. I know I don't deserve this. I know I have no right to ask. But I'm trying to do better. I just need a little help. I studied him, my expression unreadable. Then, I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my checkbook. He sat up straighter, his eyes hopeful. I wrote a check, signed it, and slid it across the desk. He grabbed it quickly, his eyes scanning the amount, then he froze. His face paled. This is for $1. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. That's what you're worth to me. His jaw tightened. That's not funny. No, I said. It's not. He stared at the check, his hand shaking slightly. You brought me here just to humiliate me? No, I said calmly. I brought you here to show you who I've become. And to make sure you understand, once and for all, that you mean nothing to me. He swallowed hard. I'm still your father. No, I said, my voice sharp. You were my father. But you lost that right when you walked away. He looked at me then, really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw it. Recognition. Understanding. He knew he had lost. Slowly, he placed the check back on my desk. I guess I deserved that. I didn't respond. He stood, hesitating for a second like he wanted to say something else. But in the end, he just nodded and turned toward the door. Before he left, I spoke. You want to do better? He paused. I met his gaze. Then figure it out. The same way I did. He swallowed, gave a small nod, and walked out. I watched the door close behind him. And this time, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel anger, or sadness, or longing. I just felt free. For the first time in my life, I had nothing left to wait for. I had won. And he was never coming back. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.